philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Okay, welcome back to the Thin Girl podcast. I'm Ruben Chavez, your host, and I'm glad to be with you again. So I wanted to do a quick follow-up to my last episode in which I kind of explained the framework that I'm trying to flesh out about well-being and how to cultivate it. I kind of explained to you the theory that underlies the framework, but in this episode, I want to do something a bit more practical, and that is go over the different needs that are necessary to meet in order to cultivate well-being and give you kind of my protocol for meeting those needs. Because ultimately, that is what it's all about. That is what well-being is all about, is simply identifying our needs and meeting them in balanced and adaptive ways. And so I think this is what everyone is talking about in one form or another. We're all aiming at well-being. Well-being, again, being a comprehensive way to describe the good life, not just happiness. Everything we do is in the name of well-being. Everything we do is in some way tied to the idea that it's going to contribute to our well-being or the collective well-being, either now or in the future. And it could be the case that we're wrong about that. We're often misguided or wrong about what it is that leads to well-being, but the motivation is the same. So anyway, that's why this is such an important topic, because it's what everyone is aiming at and what everyone's trying to cultivate. But there seems to be a lack of practical, very nitty-gritty kind of things or protocols out there that delineate exactly how to go about cultivating this. And in some sense, I think the lack of such protocols is because it kind of makes it a little bit non-romantic. It kind of de-romanticizes the idea of human flourishing, because in some sense, it's actually quite mundane. It's actually quite boring. In much the same way cultivating physical health is boring. There's a certain checklist of things that we need to do in order to be healthy. Eating certain foods, exercising, getting enough sleep, right? These are not glamorous or really exciting things. In fact, they can be put into a checklist and crossed off weekly, and that would actually be a good system for meeting those biological and physiological needs that we have to cultivate physical health. But what I'm saying is that in the same way that we can do that for physical health and meet our needs that way, meet our biological needs that way, we can also do that for psychological health and for well-being. We can, I think, and I've experimented with this already in my own life, and it's worked quite well. We can create a structure, a checklist of sorts, with the needs that we know that we have to meet in order to cultivate well-being. And then it's simply a matter of making it a priority to meet those needs on a daily and weekly and monthly basis. So it really is no more complicated than that. Now, of course, the actual execution can be complex and nuanced because we're dealing with categories of living. We're dealing with different dimensions of life, and life is messy. But in principle, it's very simple to do this. And the idea, I think, is that, maybe you need a checklist in the beginning. Maybe we have become so far removed from what it is that we actually need psychologically and emotionally and biologically and spiritually that maybe we need to go through the motions until it becomes second nature to us. And until we can, maybe we need a checklist until we no longer need it. And then we can kind of intuitively cultivate well-being and know what it is that we need. So I want to share with you my own personal well-being checklist, so to speak, and hopefully it will spark some ideas for your own. And so you can create your own. And I think we all share the same fundamental needs, by the way. In fact, I'm very confident that we do, since we're the same species. And I think that it has to do with our nature. But even though we all share the same needs, the particulars of how we express those needs varies from person to person. And so I want to share with you my own. And this checklist actually came out of a really difficult period I was going through a few months ago where I just felt very out of balance. I felt like I was just experiencing a lot of turmoil, and I needed to remember what it was that contributed to my well being. And so I started making this checklist, and it helped me to recognize where I was out of balance, where I was lacking, what needs were lacking, and maybe where I was overexpressing certain other needs. So hopefully you'll do the same for you. Okay, so let's get into it. First, I'll just list the 6 basic needs here that I'll be covering. They are autonomy, relationships, novelty, mastery, pleasure, and meaning. Maybe the last one is purpose, meaning or purpose. I'm still kind of trying to figure that out. But anyway, those are the 6 basic needs that I'll be covering. And essentially, I want to just, again, tell you some practical, real life things that I have done and still currently do to make sure I'm meeting these needs in my life on a regular basis. So for autonomy, this need has to do with kind of expressing and asserting your independence as an individual. This is a really deep need. It has evolutionary roots, which I'll go into in another episode potentially. But here are some of the ways that I meet this need in my own life. One of the ways is that I make time in my schedule to just be with myself. And I know that may sound odd for some people, especially if you are maybe a little bit more extroverted, because actually this need can somewhat overlap with introversion, with the trait of introversion, I would say. But for me, it's very important that I have time alone to be with my thoughts, to think, to just kind of recharge. And that's one of the ways that I help to cultivate this need. Another way is setting proper boundaries and making sure that I am asserting myself appropriately. For me in particular, I actually tend a little bit toward a more agreeable nature, and that essentially causes me to not speak up sometimes, not give my opinion, not communicate when I'm being annoyed or whatnot. And so speaking up for myself and kind of asserting those boundaries, letting people know what it is that they're doing, how their actions are affecting me, is really useful. And it's uncomfortable in the short term, but long term, it does lead to greater respect for myself, greater assertiveness, and a greater sense of independence. So that's a really useful thing that I've noticed that I need to do. And then, so those are just a few things. Now I'll move over to the second need, which kind of contrasts with autonomy, and that is the need for relationships. This is kind of the counterpart to autonomy because we are, again, biologically wired for relationships. And this is a huge part of our evolutionary history, of course. So as someone who does like to have time alone and have time for myself, cultivating relationships is something that I actually do need to consciously be aware of and consciously practice. And so I've actually scheduled time to speak with people who like me and who love me. This includes friends and family. And this is important for me because I can feel good for a while by myself, but if I don't have that interaction, if I don't have the feedback from other people, I can start getting very weird and I can start feeling very imbalanced. And so scheduling time to call my parents, scheduling time to speak with a friend who I really respect, making time to do these things is really beneficial for me and very balancing for me. In fact, I have a standing phone call every Monday morning with one of my friends who really helps me sort out my thoughts about my writing and about the things I'm working on in the business. So that's been really useful for me. Also, just like having in mind contribution, approaching relationships with the attitude of contribution, like what can I contribute? That's also extremely useful for cultivating a sense of well-being. And this has actually been shown in the research even. It's like paradoxically, helping others really helps yourself.
Hey there, I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about one of our sponsors for this show, Skillshare. I love learning new skills and keeping my mind sharp. Skillshare is by far one of my favorite ways to do this. It's an online learning community with thousands of different classes for creative and curious people. You can take classes on writing, photography, cooking, productivity, social media marketing, and much more. As many of you know, I've been working on a book. A while back, I took a couple writing classes on Skillshare, one by essayist Roxane Gay and another by Simon Van Buie, who's an author. And I was just blown away by the depth and clarity and practicality of these classes. Both really helped me to hone my skills and improve my craft. Skillshare is all video-based and it's all self-paced, which I love. And most classes are under an hour with short lessons to fit any schedule. I'm talking like 10 minutes per lesson in most cases, which is a very digestible way to break up any new subject. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. So explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. And if you visit that link, you'll get a free trial of their premium membership. That's Skillshare.com/thinkgrow.
So, moving on to the next need, novelty. Novelty is anything that has to do with change or unknown events. And this could be positive or negative. But the way I get my novelty is I challenge myself and I really like to be right on the edge of like my abilities. And that's kind of the idea of the concept of flow that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi outlined. So one of the ways I do that is I try to read books that are slightly above my level. And like lately, I've been really getting into old, very classic works that have shaped our world. And these are things like Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. I'm very interested in moral philosophy in particular. And so these are some of the things that have been on my mind lately and some of the things that I'm researching that are helping me to write my book. And so it's a whole thing though, because these are not easy, straightforward self-help books. These are written by some of the greatest minds that we've known. And so reading them is not just, it's not just about, for me, it's not just about reading the text itself, but about learning about the people who wrote the text. And, I'm taking courses to help me understand the material. And so it's all a very challenging process, but it's also very rewarding. It's all new material and it's novel, but it's something that helps feed my need for novelty and therefore cultivate that dimension of well-being. Another thing that I want to do in the future, but I'm not doing right now, is learn an instrument. I played violin when I was younger, but I haven't played for many years and I don't remember it. But I want to pick up like guitar. I think that would be really cool. And that's also a rewarding activity because it's something that, we need to learn and we need that challenge. We need that novelty in our lives. Okay. So on the flip side of novelty is mastery. And mastery is a need that has to do with the attainment of resources. And this could be anything from the attainment of confidence to the attainment of actual biological resources. And so if novelty is the unknown, then mastery is the known. It's being able to feel like you know what you're doing. And so one example is, and this is very simple, but I like to keep my office, the place where I work, very organized and tidy. And I like to keep my bookshelves ordered in a fashion that feels right to me, and so that I know where things are, and so that I can go access it and reference books when I need to. I know these are small things, but it's kind of mastering my environment in a sense and giving me that security that I need in that kind of just stability that I need. Another more, I think, significant way that I like to meet this need is by talking to my wife about something that I learned and thereby proving that I know something and proving it to myself. And another form of this, which I don't do as often, but I do sometimes, is coaching or mentoring someone who looks up to you. I will sometimes engage with direct messages that I get on social media and even some emails that I get where someone's asking for advice. Maybe someone is asking how I've done something, and like in my own life. And so these interactions, they help satisfy my need to feel like I know what I'm doing, right? Feel like I have some competence. And again, this is something that's not specific to me. This is a need that we all share. We need to feel like we know what's going on. And there are many ways to get this feeling and to meet this need, but these are some of the little ways that I go about it. Taking this too far, however, you can take any of these dimensions too far. Any of these needs you can overexpress. Like some people have such a need to feel certain about where they are and what they know that they become rigid in their thinking or very ideological, and they stubbornly don't want to even explore anything new, whether that's an idea or an actual physical space. They don't want to leave their home, in the case of like agoraphobia. And that's rigidity, that's mastery gone amok. It's crossed over to the point of rigidity. So anyway, just wanted to make that note. Okay, I'll move on to the fifth need, which is pleasure. And this is just doing things for their own sake and the gratification that you get from doing things that you enjoy. And this is really simple. I mean, this is something that our culture really encourages. So this is not a hard need to understand. But on the flip side, it actually is something that a lot of us tend to feel guilty about because we think we should be working or whatever. And the point is that, yeah, we need work. We need to do things. We need accomplishment. We need to feel like we're moving toward a goal. And that's kind of what mastery does. That's kind of what the mastery need encompasses. But we also need to enjoy ourselves and just do things for no other reason than because we enjoy them. And knowing that this is something that we need, I think can help to remove some of the guilt, especially if we know that we need to balance this with the other needs that we have. So one of the ways that I go about doing this, and admittedly, this is actually a need that's hard for me to meet because I do tend toward wanting to work and feeling guilty when I'm not working, or, I think sometimes we equate suffering with productivity. And sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's also really useful to just chill out and to just have fun. And one of the ways I do that is just by watching, a Netflix show with my wife when I get a chance. I'll, listen to some music in the background while I'm cleaning the kitchen or something. I know these are very small things, but we need to incorporate things that we enjoy into our lives in a daily basis, especially if we're not wired for that naturally. And so doing an art project, like I really like, sometimes I'll just start drawing on a pad because I really like the feeling of having created something, even if I'm not going to share it with anybody, or even if it's not going to be productive in any way. Another thing is just enjoying food, like eating something for the pure pleasure of it, otherwise known as cheat days, right? This is, again, if you're really oriented toward strict dieting, that's why the incorporation of cheat days is really useful, because it's actually a need we have to enjoy ourselves and to make sure that things that we're doing make sure that it's not all business. And that brings us to our sixth need, which is meaning or purpose. Not exactly sure how to label this one, but it contrasts with pleasure because it's much deeper and it is more complex, and it's more about context rather than content. Pleasure would be about the content of whatever it is that you're doing and making it enjoyable, and whereas meaning or purpose is more about the context of what you're doing and how that fits in with your broader conception of life. And so some of the ways that we can cultivate meaning, and some of the ways that I go about meeting this need, is by getting into nature. Like, this is a really big one for people. It's like a few years ago, we went to the redwood forest in California, and it's awe-inspiring. And when you're staring up at these gigantic, massive beyond belief trees, it's hard to describe the feeling that instills. It's a sense of meaning. It's a sense of being connected to something larger than yourself. And we can go about doing this in many different ways. Getting into nature is a great one. Another way we can cultivate this need for meaning is through religious means. I mean, this is really one of the needs that religion and spirituality more broadly satisfies. And it does an excellent job of this. And it's not just the belief system, although that's a big part, but it's also the community and being part of a community where you are just one person in a much larger body of people that believe the same thing. And that's very stabilizing for people. And, when we were younger, we did go to church every Sunday, but that tradition kind of fell off as I grew older. I have a lot of respect for religion. I would say it's more than respect. I mean, I really take the phenomenon of religion very seriously as a part of our human instinct and as a key factor in our evolution because it has been. And so, I take the questions of religion very seriously. And these are very meaningful questions. What does it mean to be alive? Like, why are we here? What's the best way to act? These are all questions that I think about on a daily basis. And they're fundamentally religious questions because that's how we began thinking about them in the context of very deep value structures that have been articulated by the great religions. In fact, I have it on my list this year to read the Bible all the way through because I think I need to do that. It's, not just the Bible, but the books, like I mentioned before, that have shaped our world and especially for me, the Western world, because that's the culture that I've grown up in. It places you again in a context. It places you in a much larger context than just your own small self. You're no longer an isolated individual. You're now part of a greater conversation. And that, I think, also contributes to a sense of meaning. Another way to meet this need is through music and through listening to music that inspires you and really resonates with you on a deep level. I've noticed this sometimes in my own life when, if I find the right song at the right time in my life, like I will just connect to that and it'll take me beyond myself. Music is a really deep instinct for humans. Every culture we've ever studied has some evidence of music. And so that's something fascinating. It's so deeply wired into us. And I think it's actually tied up with religion too. Like if you look at the way a concert unfolds, you have a group of people all dancing in unison, all moving in unison to the same music. And it's a very meaningful experience, especially if you like going to concerts. I don't actually, but even if you're one who likes to be alone and listen to music, I think you can still get that meaning if you find the right song and if you find the right vibe, so to speak. I like a lot of musical genres, but I really am moved by this may surprise some of you, but I'm really moved by country music. I think country music is so life affirming in many ways. I know it has this reputation as being, or I don't know if it still does, but it has a stereotypical reputation of being kind of like down in the dumps, like, my dog died, this kind of thing. But the songs that really move me and that move me to tears, quite frankly, are those that talk about kind of the natural stages of life and the human experience, having kids, getting married, all the traditional things that humans have done throughout the ages. Talking about those in poetic ways is really moving for me. And on that note, having kids, that's another source of meaning. That's something that is not immediately pleasurable, but is meaningful beyond belief. And that will place you into a context that makes it easy for you to recognize that it's not just about yourself and that life is much bigger than you. So that would be a big one that I've cultivated recently, of course, since I have a child and he just turned 2 years old. just a few days ago. So anyway, those are some of the things that I do to meet the 6 needs of autonomy, relationships, novelty, mastery, pleasure, and meaning. I hope this was helpful for you. I encourage you to make your own list. I eventually plan on producing a journal of sorts, or at least some document that will help you to keep track of your needs and these different dimensions that we've talked about, and help you kind of assess where you're doing well and where you're meeting your needs, and maybe where you are lacking and where you could pay more attention. So that's coming up along with my book. I feel like my book is coming along quite nicely. So yeah, these are some of the ideas that I'm trying to tie together in more attractive ways, but I appreciate you sticking with me here as I talk about them out loud and try to work out my thoughts. So I hope this is helpful, and until next time. Hey, thanks for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes on my website at thinkgrowprosper.com/podcast. That's where I put all the links and resources mentioned in each episode. It's also where I put the outlines of topics covered, which is a really good way to refer back to episodes in the future. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway. I make it a point to read all the reviews. You can also screenshot this episode and share it to your social media along with something you learned or found interesting. And tag me in your post, because I'd love to see what you found interesting. Say hi and thank you for your support.